Madame Bovary, and his father's bakery are the two pillars of Martin Joubert's life. In his middle-aged years, the man has left his chaotic life behind and taken on the responsibility to take over his father's bakery. His art is subtle and prescient, just like his knowledge of Gustave Flaubert's piece of literature. Now that he's in Normandy, life seems simpler and much more meaningful for him. When the 7th year of his balanced and peaceful life comes, his wife, Valerie, wakes up to see that the balanced man's work has become a mess. Clearly, some major and distressing thoughts are running through his mind. As he says, it's all about a man named Charlie, but we have no idea who he is. The only information that is given about this man is that he's English. Martin's frustration is a little unneeded, though. He is afraid that Charlie is going to harm him, but he overlooks the fact that his nationality prohibits him from being impolite. Still, Martin is anxious. Coming out of his house, he sees the man taking part in major impoliteness. As it turns out, he's been going through a divorce with a girl named Gemma, and the pain it causes him is forcing the man to burn all her stuff to a crisp. As Charlie goes into his house to get some drinks, the middle-aged man does something unusual. Looking around thievishly, he grabs Gemma's diary and hides it in his coat. That night, Martin reads through the young girl's journal and gets introduced to her mental atmosphere, not creepy at all. Reading through the letters, he realizes that Gemma was delighted by her marriage to Charlie at first, until it quickly got derailed. Once, they were living in a city, but as Martin reads, it was initially Martin's idea to move to Normandy. Naturally, all a problematic relationship needs are a gigantic change of lifestyle. Here, as Martin tells the story of the couple's arrival in Normandy, we are transported to the past and pick up the story from that point. It is a sunny Sunday morning when the new couple arrives. Immediately after their arrival, Martin's dog, Gus, gets overly interested in the newcomers, and so the man has to chase him down and meet the young couple for the first time. Their familiar names, Charlie and Gemma, and their even more familiar surname, Bovary, assure him immediately that they are going to become friends in the near future. Their dogs, however, do not require any time to become best friends. The fact that Bovarys have come to Normandy to live alongside Martin is extremely fascinating for the bakery owner. As his eyes are about to pop off from excitement, he spills the news to his family in the next scene. But neither Valerie nor his son, Julien, seem to care about the news. Clearly, they do not share the same passion for Gustave Flaubert's literature. The first time the couple comes into his bakery, Martin gets petrified. Gemma's voice, her movements, and her expressions put the middle-aged man under spell. Forgetting how to blink his eyes, he watches as the new couple meet Wizzy, a French woman who has an English husband here in Normandy, Vale. In the next scene, Gus and Carrington, Gemma's fluffy snowflake of a dog, meet each other on a field. Naturally, their owners run into one another as well. As the wind blows her hair, Martin offers to show her an especially beautiful path, throws some clumsy words about his dog, talks far too much about the old times, and makes a zero to little connection with Gemma. The girl, on the other hand, effortlessly and naturally does something that digs a deep hole in Martin's heart. Walking away in the light wind, she turns around and, with the simplest motion, waves at the man. As we said, Martin's heart is dug, and from the depths, his long-forgotten carnal desires are rediscovered. Probably not what Gemma was trying to achieve, but what is done is done. That night, the poor old man is called to help with electricity in the young couple's house. It's easy to help them out with that technical matter, but drinking whiskey with them is the deepest layer of hell for Martin. Seeing his wife sitting in front of Gemma, he often finds himself unable to concentrate on his speech. Failing to listen to a conversation about cheese and wine, he recites lines from Madame Bovary in his mind, and spellbound, gazes over at Gemma, sitting by the hearth. Naturally, Valerie notices what is going on in her husband's brain. She addresses it later that night, before going to sleep. But the couple doesn't have to fight about it. Always a sign of a passionate relationship. Soon, her new house starts to frustrate Gemma. Problems arise out of nowhere, and neither she nor Charlie have any idea how to fix them. Problems arise for Martin as well in the next scene, but his suffering is immeasurably greater. Meeting Gemma in his bakery, he offers to show her around the bakery. And so, with this, he throws himself into a raging sea of untamable desire. Watching Gemma gently work with dough, he listens to her breathing in the scorching hot room, and words begin to get stuck in his throat. It is truly a pleasantly tormenting experience for the middle-aged man. The next morning, Carrington and Gus greet each other for the third time. Martin has been extremely curious whether Gemma has read Madame Bovary or not. It is very important to him. Both admitting that she hasn't or lying that she has will inevitably cause a series of lecture-like sentences in this moment. There is no road around it. No matter what, Martin will talk about how much of a genius Gustave Flaubert is. On a more serious note, however, the archetypal character of Madame Bovary quits Gemma's personality as well. In the next scene, all the characters we know, with the addition of Wizzy's husband, gather around a table. The dinner is delightful for all, but Martin, the poor old man, is struggling to fit in. He wants to show his wit, his wisdom, or his coolness, but in the end, he fails to recognize the importance of irony. Here, Gemma gets her first job offer in Normandy. As it turns out, Wizzy wants her house redesigned, and Gemma specializes in just that. It is because of Wizzy that she is encouraged to work out more. And so, as time goes on, Gemma's cardio and French become better. It works directly against her relationship with Martin. However, trying out a diet to lose some weight, she says no to bread, not knowing that the old man bakes low-calorie bread as well. It is after Martin informs her about the low-calorie bread that something extremely sudden happens. Walking away, a bee flies its way inside Gemma's dress and stings her on her back. The pain is unexpected and severe. Gasping for air, Gemma calls for help, and naturally, Martin is there right away. Now knowing how to help her appropriately, the confused man asks for permission after permission. First, he has to open her dress, and then suck out the venom from the sting. Gemma groans from pain. She doesn't care about what's appropriate. And so, with shaking hands, Martin gets the bee out of her dress and sucks the venom from his back. It is in this comical and unusual moment that additional help comes around. Trying to remain cool, the overheated man remembers his manners and introduces the two extremely politely. Politeness, however, is the least thing that they need. What they need is a car and a hospital. The young man named Herve gets behind the wheel, then, together with Martin and Gemma, rushes towards the nearest clinic. The girl lays unconscious in the back seats as the two men discuss ordinary matters in front. As the doctor says in the next scene, it was an anaphylactic shock. Gemma will be fine. Filled with gratitude, she rests her hand on Martin's shoulder while traveling back, and with this, she makes the day of the man. The shape of his perception changes in this moment. As his face becomes brighter, he feels alive, as if a vial of pure, pleasant emotion were poured into his soul. In the next scene, Gemma goes through the opposite experience. Wizzy and her husband, Rankin, are visiting when Gemma is shown a catalog of color and design. By some chance, unfortunately, Gemma catches a glimpse of her ex-boyfriend Patrick while flicking. As it turns out, this man has cheated on her in the past, following the idea that monogamy is a farce. Now, however, he seems to be married, and so not only is Gemma unpleasantly struck by the sight of him, but she is enraged as well. That night, she pours her thoughts into her diary and emphasizes the hypocrisy in Patrick's behavior. The next morning, as boredom becomes heavier, the first glimpse of conflict is seen between the young married couple. It is probably not a full coincidence that this is exactly the morning when Martin notices her speaking with the young Herve in front of his bakery. Catching a glimpse of the two young people, Martin feels like a director and realizes that Gemma is truly beginning to live the life of Madame Bovary. The resemblance is unquestionable. The fictional Bovary crosses paths with Rodolphe in the same manner as the real Bovary meets with Herve. This is not the same thing that Valerie sees in this scene, however. The only thing she notices is her husband staring at a young boy with passionate eyes, not the best sight to come across as a wife. Not long after that, Gemma and Herve run into each other again. Gemma is in a store to buy some products for a dinner party when Herve catches her walking along the aisles. The charming man invites her to come over to his house sometime. The man is a walking incarnation of a mellow French wine, so how can Gemma say no? Martin thinks differently of Herve, however. Noticing Gemma's car and driving towards the young man's shadow, he remembers how boring a young man Herve really is. If you imagine him, pressed upon a window of his cold palace, gazing across his front yard in search of another pair of passionate eyes, he might seem like a shadowy seducer. But in reality, he's just a simple university kid, reciting laws for his exams. Martin has to see this. When Gemma makes the last turn, he presses down the brakes and stops his car in the middle of the road. As Gemma enters the shadow with a bottle of white, Martin stops by at the gate. As she walks in and treads the old rooms, Gemma is fascinated by the interiors of sunlit areas. Her communication with the young man is only slightly melodramatic. What is fully melodramatic, however, is Martin's reaction to all this. Imagining things in his head, he sits around anxiously in his car and talks to Gus about what they might be doing inside. It's all tormenting for the man. In the end, common sense prevails in his mind, and he decides to drive away before he is seen. Everyone we know except Herve is sitting around a dinner table later that night. As is heard in the old man's thoughts, Gemma seems to have been with the young man for 78 minutes. Naturally, he is not in a great mood. Suddenly, he even notices a stain on her neck that could only be made while making love, and all hell becomes loose in his heart. Now everything is clear. He needs to tell someone about this as soon as possible. This is why he spills everything to Gus outside in the next scene. Gus doesn't care. He probably has his own thing going on with Carrington. The next morning, Martin runs into Herve. The young man is speaking either with his girlfriend or with Gemma. There is no way for Martin to know. So all he does here is urge him to invite his girl to Normandy too. The old man seems to be determined to stop whatever's going on between Herve and Gemma. Whatever's going on between Herve and Gemma, however, can hardly be stopped. As the girl's passionate affair continues, her husband remains clueless. It is tough to foresee how everything will end, but Martin knows this scenario extremely well. The story he's been reading since he was a little boy is being replayed right in front of his eyes. Gemma will surely be hurt and destroyed by Herve and the relationship that doesn't have a future. All of this will end in demise. And so, as the baker becomes a fortune teller, he learns that just recently Charlie flew all the way to London for work. Gemma's regular state of mind is so greatly changed by the growing passion in her life that she forgets to take her baguette in this scene. Her interest in the old man, of course, has decreased since Herve appeared in her life. So Martin is determined to use this opportunity to drop by her house later that afternoon. He knows it perfectly well that Herve is going to be there when he arrives. Hiding around the house, he overhears conversation inside and learns that the young man has already fallen in love. The poor Herve is already starting to look at the future, and anxiety is beginning to come over him. Gemma will surely leave him, and the magical love that is raging in his heart will fade away into nothing. The poor baguette that is clenched inhumanly by Martin's hands is feeling almost the same amount of pain as the old man in this moment. After a sleepless night, he sees Gemma walk away with Carrington into the sunny morning. Following her, we see the girl changing her shoes and leaving the doggo outside the shadow gate. Passion can truly blur anyone's mind. As the little snowflake sits down in the most distinguished English manner, Gemma pounds on the shadow door. She seems to have a surprise for Herve. During the passionate love, the couple breaks something very valuable. It is a porcelain statuette that has outlived generations of Herve's family. So naturally, the young man feels frustrated immediately. There is no need to be worried, however. Charlie can fix it. He specializes in restoring ancient relics. In a few minutes, the most distinguished snowflake on the planet watches as Herve promises to follow Gemma to the end of the world. The less distinguished Frenchman receives some news as well. When Gemma comes by his bakery, she reveals that she's flying alone to London very soon. This affair between the young people is painful for Martin. Pain is so irresistible that he feels forced to do something about it. But if Gemma isn't around, he fears that he will be completely powerless. Thinking about the possible solutions that night, he turns to literature once more. An idea pops into his head, an idea he's not particularly proud of. But morality is beyond the old man during these tough emotional times. As he remembers, Emma Bovary and Rodolphe's relationship ends with a heartbreaking farewell letter, written by the young squire. It was Gustave Flaubert who made Rodolphe write that sad, relationship-destroying letter. He had all the right to meddle in their relationship. They were parts of his imagination. But the same cannot be said about Martin. Deciding to break the young couple up, he writes a farewell letter to Gemma in Herve's name and waits, as the rest of the story plays out in front of his eyes. Gemma messages Herve immediately after reading the fateful fake letter, but the young man doesn't have much time to respond quickly. His mom has arrived, and he's busy being talked to like a 10-year-old. The mother has just found out about the broken statuette, and is now determined to find out what happened to it. It is when Gemma walks inside the front yard of the shadow that Herve finally manages to write her a message back. Because of his mother, he writes that he will be unable to follow her in London. In Gemma's mind, it is all over. The reality of the letter has been confirmed. Later that evening, Herve's mother visits Charlie to retrieve her statuette and finds out, to her surprise, that the man has no idea who her son is. Herve has been saying that he brought it to the English restorer, but the man keeps stressing that he has never heard of a young man by the name of Herve. The string of lies is beginning to become loose and strange. Suspecting that something is going on behind his back, Charlie asks Gemma a question about the statue later that evening. This is when the girl answers that she has something important to say. It all looks as if the big revelation is about to happen, but angry Charlie decides that he doesn't want to hear it. He already knows. For weeks, Gemma hasn't been talking to him, and now she wants to speak. Storming inside, Charlie starts collecting his things and leaves. Martin notices him driving away. He finds Carrington sitting alone in a field the next morning. Once he brings her back to Gemma, He is invited inside for a cup of tea. The girl seems to want to talk to him about something briefly. Surprised, he walks in and takes a letter that Gemma hands him. It turns out to be a word from Herve's mother. Harshly, he is asking for her statuettes back. As Gemma reveals it to Martin, who already knows everything, she brings it back home, but can't find it again. She needs help coming up with an answer for this lady. It is extremely hard for Martin to concentrate on the letter in her presence. Chanting the same words over and over again, his mind races between emotions, and the internal struggle causes heat to jump up in his brain. Clouded by the steam, suddenly, something very unexpected happens to him. Gemma jumps up from fear and screams out as a rat runs beneath the table. Both fly up in fear, and grabbing the opportunity, the old man lets all his emotions out. Once the door is open, however, it cannot be closed. The toxicity that has been building up in his heart explodes out of him as he notices a bag of arsenic in her basement. It is a poison, a terrible substance that destroys the environment. There is another reason why he gets so upset by the sight of this poison. However, this substance is terribly misused in Gustave Flaubert's book, and Martin fears that Gemma will use it for the same reason in the end. In any case, this substance must not be available to any person named Bovary. Later that day, Gemma goes to work at Wizzy's home and encounters a terrible surprise. Patrick, her ex-boyfriend, is sitting on a patio. The greetings go as expected, delightfully as a crawl, in search of a drop of water in the middle of a desert. As Gemma soon learns, Patrick is now divorced and ready to spend some time with her for old time's sake. Gemma is acting harsh and rude, but there seems to be a flicker of irony in her resentment. As time flows on, Gemma asks Martin to accompany her during the meeting with Herve's mother's lawyer. She wants to meet Martin at a church. Again, the man is fascinated by how much Gemma's story is similar to the fictional Gemma Bovary's. The latter also meets somebody in the church. At that point of the Gustave Flaubert story, an extremely sexual, erotic scene occurs. There is no telling what kind of hopeful thoughts are running through Martin's mind. And frankly, I wouldn't want to know. On a serious note, however, Gemma Bovary and Emma Bovary become one in Martin's imagination. Outside the church, he notices Gemma with Patrick and realizes that Gustave Flaubert's story is truly being played over. The couple is kissing one another passionately in the street. We don't see what happens in Gemma's van soon after. But during a dinner that afternoon, Gemma tells Patrick that this can never happen again. She failed to resist him today, but she will never sink so low anymore. With him, she feels like an object to have fun with, and she won't do this to herself anymore. Coming back home, she finds the statuette in her basement and realizes that Charlie has known everything about her and Herve all along. The statuette is put on the table. It must have been with Charlie, but after Herve's mother's arrival, he must have understood that his wife was cheating on him. Gemma doesn't expect forgiveness, but after leaving a voicemail to him, she says that she would like to see him again. She is crying herself to tears for what she's done. She apologizes to Martin for not arriving at the curb in the next scene. She invites him for a drink too, and as the conversation begins between them, she learns a secret this man has been holding for so long. Martin is confused and anxious, failing to control his speech fully. The truth about the letter partially slips out of his mouth, and reality presents itself fully to Gemma Bovary. Demanding an explanation for all this, she hears that Martin fears she will end up like her fictional alter ego. This is why he tried to meddle in her relationships. Gemma understands that it is only a half-truth, but she doesn't get mad at the old man. Seeing a strange glimpse of innocence and grief in the old man's eyes, she forgives him, tells him that she's nothing like Madame Bovary, and kisses him gently on the lips. Martin is petrified. As the sun lights up his blue eyes, he just stands there, completely still and in awe, failing to believe that Gemma has just kissed him. Changed by what just happened, he bakes bread for her the next day and takes it to her door. It is when she opens that door for Patrick that she finally sees it. Even though Gemma has clearly stated to him that she never wants to be with him again, Patrick is determined to get her back. Asking her to get back together, he promises that he will change, and that together they will work perfectly in London. To him, it's their fate to be together. The fact that they ran into each other this far from home says that there is something very meaningful between them. It is when the two of them are together that Carls comes back. Martin sees him entering the house, but very soon he sees him coming out, screaming for help. When the old man rushes into the house, he finds Patrick colorless and scared, while Gemma is lying still on the kitchen floor. She is not breathing at all. As her body is taken away by medics, they are standing petrified together, reflecting on the fact that Gemma is deceased. It is truly a sorrowful moment. It is hard to imagine everything getting worse, But real life seems to be a much better writer than Gustav Flaubert when it comes to writing tragedies. As Martin learns that night, Gemma chokes on a piece of bread, and that is why now her body is lying at the mortuary, still and cold. And being the fanciest of writers, reality sprinkles some glimpse of irony on top of this enormous tragedy. As Martin reflects on this news, he hears fireworks go off in the distance. Wizzy is having a birthday party. Everybody feels guilty about Gemma's death. Charlie, however, thinks he has the best reason to do so. Going back in time to the moment when Gemma perished, we see how everything happened from Charlie's perspective. As he comes into the house, he sees Patrick trying to get a piece of bread out of Gemma's throat with the Heimlich method. Thinking that they are having a course, he gets the man off of her wife and beats him in the living room as the girl's soul leaves her body nearby. Patrick feels responsible as well. It was his rigorous attempts to get her back that caused this catastrophe. She was anxious because of him, and this was the reason why she choked on bread. And so, with this, we are back to where we started. As Martin reads Gemma's diary, he learns that the girl was planning to get back with Charlie before the catastrophe happened. It is already dawn when he finishes reading the journal. 6 months later, another family arrives to live in the house in front of Martin. As comical and ironic as it is, they are Russian, and their last name is Kalinina. The house must be under some terrible spell since it's attracting only people whose names resemble nothing but tragedy and demise. Martin decides to introduce himself to the new neighbors immediately, of course. We, however, realize now that the information about their last name was a lie. The girl is as French as the word baguette, and her last name is Mercier. As it turns out, it was only a joke from Martin's son. It is a delight to watch as the old man tries to live another of his favorite books,